Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops.
And Omari Sankofa for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. Make sure you are joining Wes and Blake Silverman over on the Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. I know they are covering the NBA trade deadline from a Pistons perspective as well. Obviously, read all of Omari's work over at the Detroit Free Press and free subscription over to the Motor City Hoops Substack, always for breakdowns of potential trades, free agents, draft picks, and of course, analysis after every game. Although, O2, I have to be honest, I haven't even watched a second of the Pistons Tuesday night win over the Nuggets yet. Yesterday was kind of hectic. I wanted to take my boys to the local high school game, so I will watch that at some point today during my planning period or lunch or something like that.
Yeah, good win. And we will do a more formal pod later on this week, and we'll definitely get into that and likely the Wizards game as well, along with a full deadline recap. But this morning, we're just going to recap the Jaden Ivey trade. For those who missed it or are unaware of the full details, the Pistons sent Jaden Ivey to the Chicago Bulls for Kevin Huerter, Dario Saric, and then there was also a pick swap involved with the Minnesota Timberwolves as well. So big trade, obviously, for Ivy to be the first one traded out. Just sort of what's your initial overview of the trade? And if you have questions, go ahead and send those questions in as well.
Yeah, so just to shout out a few people here. Bullvine says, good morning, longtime listener. First time I caught you guys live. That is the one thing, O2, about recording it this somewhat unusual time. And guys, we're only going to be here for 30 minutes this morning. I do have to get to work. But sometimes we do get a chance to meet some different viewers that don't always get to catch us live. So my initial thoughts, I was not surprised that Jaden Ivey was traded, O2. Listen, I will hand up. I was somebody who liked the Jaden Ivey pick. I was somebody who, from the start, thought that Jaden Ivey could play with Cade Cunningham, which is different than what a lot of people thought. I've said that my biggest takeaway from last year was that we didn't get the full data collection on Jaden Ivey. That was my biggest quote-unquote disappointment from last season. My biggest worry about this trade is that Detroit sold on him. I don't mean in the bad way, but like the lowest point in terms of him recovering off this broken leg. And we see a very different. I do want to talk about Jaden Ivey in Chicago at some point. I was not surprised to see Jaden Ivey moved. I was a little bit surprised that it was in this move. And I know we'll get a little bit into Kevin Huerter, the fact that Dario Saric takes up some of that trade exception that we've been talking about forever. I think that was more of my surprise. Is if Jaden Ivey was in a Trey Murphy III move, I would have been fully okay with it. I'm a little less encouraged by a Jaden Ivey traded for a short-term piece, what looks like right now, we still got time, right, for Kevin Huerter.
Yeah. So I feel like Jaden Ivey is just an example of the ground kind of shifting underneath a player's feet, not to the player's fault or the team's fault or no one did anything wrong, but you just have a scenario where he's going to be a restricted free agent this summer, and he returned to a situation that was unlike the situation he was in when he first got hurt, right? He gets hurt on New Year's last year. The Pistons had just begun to figure out winning at that point. And then you come back to a team that's, on pace for 60 wins, already went to the playoffs. It has pretty good depth at guard, with Cade and Duncan Robinson starting, and then you have Dennis coming off of the bench. And, I think the question for the front office just was, well, what is his pathway, right? What's the pathway to Jaden Ivey getting that extension with us to him, kind of getting back to where he was last season. And what they've got 31 games left, 33 games left, something like that. And it just wasn't going to work out here. I think that's what the conclusion was it's unlikely we get to a situation where Ivy can have the same role he had when he first got hurt. And like I mentioned, you've got this guard rotation that's pretty locked in at this point. Dennis Jenkins is likely to get a standard contract, going into this Wizards game because that's his last game of eligibility. And for the Pistons, it was just okay. So if we're going to trade him, what can we get? And it's like you said, you kind of trade him at a point where his value is not highest because he's still working his way back. You get Kevin Herter, and a lot of people have brought up he's only shooting 31% from three this season. He's got a track record for knocking down threes. So I think the hope and belief from the front office is that, in this offense, playing off of Cade, he will get back to knocking down shots. And he does more than that too. Sarek, I think was just more of a throw in. He hasn't really played this season or last. So for all intents and purposes, it's really an Ivy for a Kevin Herter swap. So does that work out for the Pistons long term? We'll just have to see, right? A lot of that kind of comes down to what J.I. could do with his opportunity in Chicago and him continuing to get back to full health. But other than that, I think the trade just reflects the timing of it all. The Pistons just didn't have time. J.I. didn't have the time necessary for him to get back to where he needed to go. And it was decided that a fresh start was probably better. So I would agree. I'm not surprised J.I. got traded for those reasons. The actual mechanics of the deal, I think, is a bit tougher to project. But if it all goes according to plan, then Herter's a guy that can space the floor. And then that pick swap with Minnesota involved is 1 through 19 protected. We have some questions about that. So basically, as long as Minnesota finishes top 10, the Pistons have the option to swap that pick, assuming that their pick is better. So if Minnesota ends up with like the 24th pick and the Pistons stay in second place league wide and have the 29th, then the Pistons have the right to swap up to 24. So you get, it's a late first either way, but anytime you can move up, from the 29th pick, that's probably a good situation. So, not draft capital in the traditional sense, but you did get a little bit of a better pick out of it potentially.
Yeah. So just to fully through the trade, Chicago got Conley Jr. from Minnesota as well. And Jaden Ivey, Minnesota got cash considerations. The Minnesota side of this is they are not only below the second apron, they are also below the first apron and almost out of the tax right now in Minnesota, which, as people kind of understand now through this new CBA, being below those aprons allow for real flexibility if you were to try to go make a move. And honest, I don't know where they're at, but they're a team we've heard mentioned around Giannis, right? So just that's why they did this. I'm trying to limit the Kevin Herter conversation, O2. You and I haven't talked about this. I don't know if he ends up getting moved again or if he's just on this team moving forward. I think for me, I would rather just wait until Friday morning when we record and really dive into who is Kevin Herter, what can he provide, how does he fit on the, because this team is going to look different. The funny thing about you saying Dennis Jenkins needs to be on this roster is instead of making a 2-for-1 trade, the Pistons made a 1-for-2 trade. So not only do they need to clear a roster spot for Dennis, they have more than 15 people on the roster right now, which could be simply waiving Dario Saric, waiving Isaac Jones. There would be some dead money this year on Saric, and then you get Jenkins on the roster. But I wouldn't be surprised if here's my quick thoughts on Herter. I like this a lot more if Herter is essentially a Karis LeVert replacement and Karis LeVert is moved to get some more big wing / forward depth. You turn LeVert into a quote unquote Bobby Portis or something like that. So anyway, okay, the pick swap. I'm glad. Yeah. So Beasley says, can we get an explanation on the pick from Minnesota? Great. And Blog Pistons. Good morning, guys. First round, protect the Wolves. Do we get, something? Greetings from Spain. So thank you for joining us from Spain. Omari outlined it. Here's I think where some people are confused. There's no other incentive. If they don't swap, it's gone. That's it. If Minnesota's pick ends up 17, Detroit keeps their pick where it's at and we move on. There's no second round picks in the future, anything like that. If it ends up at 22 and Detroit is at 28, like you said, you move up 6 spots. Somebody asked me on Twitter, like, what is the significance of that? It's just my big board. That's right around the range of where my big board has a tier where all of the players are in that same tier. Now, is there still an advantage, to your point, of picking 6 spots higher? Absolutely. Because here's the other thing. Let's say some people's favorite Yaxel Lindeborg is dropping to 1602. It's way easier to go from 22 to 16 than it is from 20. Maybe that saves you a second round pick to make that jump or something like that. So I think it is. I don't think it's like a game changer, but I don't think it's just like a nothing. Here's where it could be a nothing. Detroit goes through a slump. Minnesota gets Giannis and goes crazy. And all of a sudden, Minnesota, the pick is worse than Detroit's anyway, or the opposite. I think where this was exciting to me at one point is like, man, what if Anthony Edwards gets hurt and Minnesota ends up with the 16th pick and you're jumping from 28 to 16? Well, since those protections are on it, that's not even an option.
Yeah. So there's there's a narrow window basically where this works out for the Pistons, and arguably that narrow it's also the one that's most likely to occur. Even if they get Giannis, let's say Minnesota finishes like third in the West, or somewhere along those lines behind the Spurs and the Thunder, right? Now the Pistons maybe are just going from 28 to 26. So there's a chance it ends up not making a big difference. And there's a chance that we look back a couple of years from now and we say, oh, they moved from 28 to 23. 23 became 18, and now you're just outside the lottery rather than and that's trading for 18, because if Minnesota finished 18, then the pick wouldn't go to Detroit. But it just gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more optionality. And in most drafts, I would say that there's a noticeable difference from being in the upper 20s and the lower 20s, just from a prospect value standpoint. So, this, it may not do anything for them. It may end up being pretty significant. We'll see. But in lieu of getting some actual draft capital for JI, you do possibly just get a slightly better first round pick this year. So that's basically all that means.
And I do think it's important to mention just like the cap sheet stuff. I haven't plugged it in yet because, again, O2, I'm kind of just waiting to see how the rest of the deadline plays out. But it is important to mention that Jaden Ivey would have had a $30.3 million cap hold. His qualifying offer was 13.4. You would have hit the offseason with him in restricted free agency. Obviously, Jalen Duren in restricted free agency, who has a $19.4 million cap hold. Tobias has a cap hold, depending on what you want to do with him. Asar Thompson is extension eligible starting this summer. So, it is. I'm not saying that's a reason to trade somebody, is just because you have a lot of other decisions to make contract-wise and cap sheet-wise. But not Karis LeVert, Kevin Huerter is on an expiring contract. Dario Saric, if he does somehow end up on this roster the rest of the season, is also an expiring contract. My issue with the Saric thing is what Michael says. He uses up the TPE. I don't love that. I don't love that. Really limits anything to an extent, depending on it limits the numbers of players you could go attack here moving forward now. With that said, I think it's very easy to see that Huerter could just replace LeVert. Huerter could replace LeVert, and now you can just essentially use LeVert as a quote-unquote trade exception. And for what it's worth, because they got signed to the same contract, Karis LeVert's number is the same as what that trade exception was, because it's the non-tax MLE. So
yeah, so that does kind of cut into their optionality a little bit. And I do want to get some clarification on this too, because I think Saric's his contract probably falls just out of the biannual, right? And that's why they have to use
real
TP.
Quick, shout out Keith Smith. Amongst everything he was doing yesterday, he took a 5-minute phone call from me to explain this to me. And I don't want to do not aggregate this, please, because that dude is so good to us. And so I don't want it to end up changing. As he always says, these things can be fluid. But the way he explained it to me, Saric's number was above the biannual. They wouldn't even necessarily want to use the biannual to where they wouldn't have it this offseason. And so that the only way it worked to him was Herter for Ivy was kind of 1-to-1, and Saric would have to cut into the Schroeder trade exception. And this was the main reason for the call. They can't re-aggregate Herter. Like, that was my initial hope, was like, man, you have $17-18 million of expiring Herter. You have $13-14 million of expiring LeVert. You have $5 million of expiring Saric. You don't even have to put Tobias Harris in a theoretical Michael Porter Jr. trade. These guys cannot be re-aggregated here before the deadline. So,
yeah. So like any year until the deadline, deals could always be expanded and altered, and there's a chance the Pistons end up making some other maneuver to clear out some flexibility. But that's essentially where they stand now. So a lot of this trade, I think, really for the Pistons to work out for the Pistons as it currently stands, you do need Herter to come in and be a pretty good rotation piece. And we'll talk about him later this week. I think there's a lot to his game that can help this team. I think you agree as well, Bryce. And if we have about 15 minutes left, so if you have any questions, feel free to get those questions in. So what else do you think? Go quick. Go ahead if you have something.
Just on the LeVert thing, on the Herter thing, real quick. Go over to the Substack. Here's what I'll say about my notes on the Substack, guys. Those are completely unbiased. Like, you can think I suck as an evaluator of watching NBA basketball, but I wasn't watching Kevin Herter games this year going, man, I think they're going to trade for him at the deadline. We never once brought his name up. So those are completely unbiased notes as I watched the Chicago Bulls games I watched this year. And I have, hopefully Synergy doesn't get mad at me for this, but I have some of his Synergy numbers on there. I have his 5-year averages. Like, just go check out the Substack and you can get a quick kind of view of what Kevin Herter has been this season. So just to touch on that. And again, I think we should wait till Friday to really dive into that. Get to some comments real quick. Order of the Blazing Horse. What up, Doe? In the morning. Blog Pistons. Stewart can get extended this summer, right? Yes, that is true. It's also worth noting, though, that Stewart is under contract for 26-27 and 27-28. So, like, it's just, Matthews, hey, miss you guys. How are you? I think this is our guy from Brazil, O2. So,
what's going on, man? Yeah. We're not going to do the time bit. I know what time it is there now.
I almost went there, and then I was like, YouTube user says Detroit can end up cap space team. Again, I'm gonna wait for everything to play out and then plug stuff in. Keith Smith was a very busy guy yesterday. That's it. And the Celtics trade literally happened right after we got off the phone, and I'm sure he knew it was coming. So I appreciate him so much. I thought I saw one about the TPE. So yeah, what we're one other thing that I really wanted to say real quick. Like it or not, Jaden Ivey was not a Trajan Langdon draft pick. And people can, agree, disagree, love, hate, whatever. But yes, our Brazilian best friend. I love it. But those things do, I don't want to say they are the end all be all, but it is a little bit different. And so I do think that that's something to bring up as well.
Yeah, it is a little bit different. What else would you like to see them do ahead of the deadline, just from a need standpoint? I don't think the Pistons are completely done. The deadline's 3 p.m. Thursday, so obviously we still have a pretty substantial window of time for something to happen. How would you map this out?
So MB, one, appreciate you being here. All that, please be respectful in the chat. Like, I understand you're frustrated and disagree with a lot of things, but just be respectful. It's totally laughable what trade market is out there for LeVert. Again, I don't think there is a trade market. I think essentially it's the same idea as the trade exception, which his number is exactly the same as the trade exception. If you use the trade exception, you're going to have to attach assets to that. And so it's the same idea to me. There was another one. I think, okay, so I think what I would like to see, O2, just kind of looking at where the roster is at now, I'm not expecting a big move. I don't know that I was ever expecting a big move. I think what I would like to see now is you have this backcourt, right, of Cade and Duncan Robinson, Dennis and Kevin Herter. I think what I would like is the LeVert contract to get moved for some big wing / front court. Like, can they go get a true 4-man to come off the bench, right? If they're not going to make some big move. And again, like, I always bring up Bobby Portis because he kind of answers a couple different things for me. He can space the floor and he plays the 4, which I think is something they need in the back. Like, this is the role he has played for many years in Milwaukee. And so it doesn't have to be Bobby Portis. If people don't like the Bobby Portis name, I'm okay with that. But I think that archetype of player is what I would like to see them go attack with one more move.
Yeah. So what's funny is that Bobby Portis would have fit into that TPE, and now they would have to figure out a different method of getting him, which is why you bring up the Vert contract. Being around 14 billion, it kind of fits in that window. I'd like they could use some more power forward depth. They're still sort of in a scenario where outside of Tobias, they don't have a lot of true fours. You could play Stu there. He's been good at the 4 this season. Like, you can play Ron and Asar there, but there's just some 4 matchups where they, it just doesn't make sense to really do that. So, we'll see how that ends up shaking out. But, I think beyond that, they're also in a position where they've got to create some roster space, right? Because you're already at 16. You promote Dennis, then that's 2 spots you have to clear. And then if you bring in anybody else, then that also just kind of puts pressure on the roster as well. So we'll still see some balancing here. What that ends up looking like, we'll see. There's still a pretty significant domino to fall here with Giannis. Sort of like that will they or won't they holding pattern that will be resolved one way or another for the next few days. So if they trade Giannis, maybe that makes getting Portis a little bit more realistic. We'll have to see how that shakes out.
Mark asks, what are the chances we go after Austin Reeves, assuming he doesn't pick up his player option? I mean, again, I'd have to crunch the numbers, but them getting that type of cap space would be really difficult with the number that Cade is going to be on next year, which is 50 million. And then you're going to get Jalen Duren's, number kicking in, and some of the, actually becoming a cap space team. I suppose there's a path to it, but to get to the number you'd have to get to bring in Austin Reeves would be, I think, pretty significant. Yeah. Key seems like such a genuinely nice guy. He never seems to hesitate to help. No, I mean, the dude literally joined a podcast one time where I text him during the middle of the podcast to come join. So just a great dude. Matthew's asking about the pick swap again. Just for anybody that joined late, O2, you want to just cover that really, really quick yet again?
Yeah, so it's protected 1 through 19. So basically, if Minnesota finishes anywhere between 20 and 30 in draft order, the Pistons have the right to swap picks with them. So the Pistons are on pace to finish first in the East pretty handily. So let's say they end up with the 29th pick based on their current trajectory. Let's say Minnesota finishes with the 24th pick based on their current trajectory. That means that the Pistons have the right to swap their 29th pick for Minnesota's 24th pick. So you could just think of it really as whoever has the higher pick, 20 through 30, it goes to the Pistons. If it lands at 19, if Minnesota slides a little bit and that ends up being the 19th pick, they keep the pick. Minnesota, that is. It wouldn't go to Detroit. So Detroit would still have the 29th pick. If Minnesota has the 20th pick, then Detroit could swap and go up from 29 to 20. So that's basically how that works. You have a chance, I say a pretty good chance, given that, bearing any injuries, Minnesota is probably going to finish, somewhere between, 20 and 27 in draft order. It just slightly improves your draft standing this year. It doesn't have any bearing beyond this season. And if Minnesota really slides and ends up 19 or 18, it will not go to Detroit. So basically just anywhere between 20 and 30, Pistons get the better of the two picks.
Yeah, it doesn't open up an extra pick for Detroit. There's, essentially Detroit is in the same spot in terms of they have a pick every single year. They have their own pick every single pick or every single year moving forward, which is a great spot to be in if you do want to make a move at a big move at some point, in the next couple days or in the off season. But all it does is just a little bit of upside, which again, I understand if people, I feel like you probably look at this trade depending on how you looked at Jaden Ivey before yesterday, right? I mean, I literally had somebody text me and say, if Jaden Ivey's not traded, the Pistons should just waive him, like essentially pull the Killian Hayes. I didn't agree with that, but all I'm saying is there's some people that thought his value in his game was that low. And I think there was other people in the fan base that still thought he was, once he got healthy, was going to be the second option on this team next to Cade Cunningham. So Robbie says, morning, y'all. Good morning. I want to quickly touch on what this means for Jaden Ivey. We talked about this yesterday on Game Theory. Sam brought up a good point. The way Jaden Ivey plays makes a lot of sense for the Chicago Bulls. Like, I think that could end up being a very good marriage because they play so fast. He'd get to play off a jumbo creator in Josh Giddey. They love to get out in transition. So I do think J.I. is going to a situation, offensively at least, where, he could, once he gets back healthy, if he gets back healthy, whatever it is, that ends up being a good situation for him. Then we'll see how the offseason plays out. We know how these restricted free agency things go. We just saw it with them and Josh Giddey there. But I at least did want to bring that up in terms of, offensively, maybe him being able to find his footing in a system like Chicago that fits what he can do.
Yeah. I think at this point we have a good idea of J.I.'s game. He's better playing off of another creator, and he should have more runway in Chicago. They don't have the same upfront pressure to win that the Pistons have. If they choose to, they could again give him a pretty long runway, let him showcase his game, position himself for some type of contract offer this summer. And the main thing I think is just the need for minutes for J.I. Just he needs to be able to audition himself, audition his game, position himself for the next stage of his career. And he could do that in Chicago, I think, easier than he could do that here in Detroit. I think it's tough just from the standpoint of, thinking about how J.I. arrived.
I was thinking about this yesterday.
With his mom, playing for the Shock, his dad, born in Detroit, played for Country Day, and then, his grandfather, James Hunter, being a defensive back for the Lions in the 70s and early 80s. He did have that legacy here, and I know it meant a lot to J.I. To be a Detroit Piston. So, I think that's kind of the downside in all this is that, J.I., the person, is, awesome. I think it's tough to kind of see it in this way for him, just given the way it started and where he was prior to the injury. I think along with that, like, that's just how the league goes sometimes. It doesn't always work out exactly where you started. And like I said earlier, I think Chicago can give him that opportunity and that runway that he wasn't going to get here. I guess the other downside is that if J.I. really, really pops, he gets his legs back under him, he gets his groove back.
You see that multiple times every year.
Yeah, the Pistons have to see him 4 times a year. So, that's not as ideal. But again, I think the Pistons and J.I. just had an ideal circumstance that they were working from, and this ended up being the result.
To this comment, didn't realize I logged into the Chicago Bulls YouTube channel. With all due respect, Jaden Ivey played here for multiple years. I think spending 5 minutes talking about where he's going next in his career is a fair use of our time on the Pistons Pulse. So, again, appreciate everybody that joins and comments and engages. We appreciate the support, but I think we do a pretty good job covering the Detroit Pistons. And I think spending some time on J.I. and his future is more than reasonable. Want to finish with this one. Shane says, was cool to meet in Denver last week. So yeah, shout out. I think we were walking off after watching the stuff courtside pregame, and he yelled at us, and as we were walking off, we were able to say hello and meet him and all of that. So it's always cool to meet fans. I know you get this a little bit more than me. I only get to a game once a year, hopefully a playoff game this year, but it was really, really cool. It was really cool to meet somebody. So, always shout out.
A lot of Pistons fans in Denver too.
It was crazy, right? We were sitting there, and I think a Nuggets exec got mad at us because he was sitting very close to us, and we kept commenting about how many Pistons fans were there. And he finally goes, "Well, you're staring at the opponent's side because of where our view was." But it was it was kind of funny how many Cade Cunningham jerseys there was an old school jersey even that we saw. So I don't know. It was crazy how many Pistons fans. So point being, sorry, I got a little distracted by the comment stuff going on. Point being, if you guys see us, say hello. We love it and we appreciate it truly.
Yeah, I always say hi if you see us. People see me at the LCA. Say what's up. I always enjoy that. Feel free to say hi. Bryce, if you ever see him, he's 6'6". Like, I feel like he's like, whatever I'm with Bryce, he just stands out. Like, very.
It's either me or that Rockets assistant coach. It may be the Rockets assistant coach if it's summer league, but if it's a Detroit Pistons game, it's probably me.
Yeah, for sure. So that was fun. And then, like we said earlier, if you joined late, we'll be back after the deadline Friday morning to dive deeper into Kevin Huerter and any other deals that the Pistons make between now and then. So busy week, obviously. And then after that, All-Star. I mean, it's a lot of good stuff coming up.
2 is going to LA this year, so he may need some time to rest after the All-Star break. Michael says lost in all of this is a nice win versus Denver. I mean, not fully healthy still, but Jokic back at least. Again, guys, I haven't watched the game yet, lost in everything, but we will definitely talk about it. I apologize that we can't get into it this morning. We're time crunch a little bit. I got to get to work. And again, I haven't watched the game yet, but I will watch some point today, and I will have the notes up on the Substack like always. But guys, thank you so much for joining us. I know sometimes we got to go weird times. If something crazy happens before, we'll go. But right now, the plan is to go Friday morning. I was talking about this, too. The NBA screwed the Detroit Pistons and really us over this trade deadline. Yes. They played last night. They play Thursday, and they play Friday. So I don't know, man. Like, that's just I'm a little frustrated with the actual game schedule and the deadline here. Can we get a few days off to just digest the deadline? But it is what it is. Players have to go out and play. So who am I to complain about it? We'll manage. Most likely back Friday morning, 02.
Yeah, most likely back Friday. So again, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us. And with that, I will go ahead and close us out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Dakota Avery Nichols, and big shout out to West Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you on a couple of days.